When fall comes, kicking summer out on its treacherous ass, as it always does one day sometime after the midpoint of September, it stays a while, like an old friend you have missed. It settles in the way an old friend will settle into your favorite chair and take out his pipe and light it, and then fill the afternoon with stories of places he has been and things he has done since he last saw you. In the fall, night comes like this in the lot. The sun loses its thin grip on the air first, turning it cold, making it remember that winter is coming and winter will be long. Thin clouds form and the shadows lengthen out. They have no breath, as summer shadows have. There are no leaves on the trees or fat clouds in the sky to make them thick. They are gaunt, mean shadows that bite the ground like teeth. At 3 a.m, the blood runs slow and thick, and slumber is heavy. The soul either sleeps in blessed ignorance of such an hour, or gazes about itself in utter despair. There is no middle ground. At 3 a.m, the gaudy paint is off that old whore, the world, and she has no nose and a glass eye. Gaiety becomes hollow and brittle, as in Poe's castle surrounded by the Red Death. Horror is destroyed by the boredom. Love is a dream. It stands on the hill, overlooking the village like some kind of dark idol. Nikki here, and I am so excited to review Salem's Lot for you today, which Stephen King wrote from September 1972 to June 1975. And this is the first Stephen King novel I have ever read, admittedly. And I've read some Stephen King before. I read his memoir on writing, and I really enjoyed it. And I also read a couple of his short stories, but then a few years ago, I tried to read it. And it did not work out for me. And people told me, no, that's not a good place to begin with Stephen King. And so in the spirit of spooky season, I am giving Mr. King another try, or I gave him another try with Salem's Lot. And it was well worth it. So a lot of this review is going to give you the aesthetic of Salem's Lot and how much I want you to read it without any spoilers. Salem's Lot is Stephen King's second novel, published in 1975, a few years after Carrie. And it's very clear that Salem's Lot was heavily inspired by Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House. I mean, it's obvious. He opens part 1 with the quote that is the opening to Haunting of Hill House. I have the Penguin horror edition of Haunting of Hill House here, and the opening segment is on the back that begins with "no live organism." And if you are not familiar with it, I'll just read it for you quickly here. No live organism can continue long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there, walked alone. Stephen King builds on Jackson's idea that evil can manifest and live on after that person who has performed the evil deeds has perished. And in a sense, that's part of where the hauntings come from. And in Salem's Lot, there's Marston House, which is kind of constructed in the image of Hill House. It's on this tall hill that overlooks the village. All right, so before I get into what I liked and what I didn't like and my ratings for Salem's Lot, I'm going to give you a brief synopsis to set the stage. In this story, the beginning opens at the end. A tall man and a bright boy are traveling across country, away from Salem's Lot. You soon learn that the tall man is Ben Mears. I will not reveal the boy's identity to you here, though it's not too difficult to figure that out early on. Ben is a semi-successful novelist whose wife died 2 years earlier in a motorcycle accident. He was driving. We flash back to several months before the road trip with the boy. Ben has returned to Salem's Lot after 25 years to work on a new novel and put to rest a fear that has haunted him since he entered the abandoned Marston house on a childhood dare and saw something that he could never unsee. In the small, tight-knit town, Ben is viewed warily as a stranger, and shortly after his arrival, townies start disappearing. Could Ben be to blame, or is there something darker, more sinister, afoot? While confronting a slew of terrors, Ben finds friendship, love, and purpose. But will it matter in the end? In case you didn't know, the big bad in Salem's Lot is a vampire, a very old vampire that comes to town, and he's attracted to the evil seeping out of the Marston house. And I am not going to ruin it for you and tell you who the vampire is. It probably doesn't wreck anything, but I went into Salem's Lot not knowing what to expect, not knowing anything at all about it other than that there are vampires in it. And I just thought it made it special for me. And I had never seen the miniseries or the movie. And so with any vampire novel, there are the vampire rules. And in the spirit of vampires, I wore my Smashing Pumpkins, The World is a Vampire, Bullets with Butterfly Wings t-shirt. And I have Buffy here to help me out, explain the rules of vampires in Salem's Lot to you, because really my first exposure to vampires in fiction was through Buffy. And so that's like my foundation for what I think the proper rules of vampires are. Just that's my measuring stick, even though I know that the rules come from folklore and every work of fiction is different, and I have to accept that. So let's take a look at Stephen King's rules in Salem's Lot. So as in any vampire tale, the way that someone becomes a vampire is their blood is sucked from a vampire, and they suck the blood of a vampire in return. It's like this poisoning and fusing. In, to quote Buffy, it's this whole sucking thing that needs to transpire. And in Salem's Lot, this process seems to be pretty slow, the slow drainage or poisoning, where a person starts to feel really ill after they've been bitten, and they end up wanting to sleep through the day. The sunlight makes them feel really icky, and then eventually they die and they rise as the undead, as a vampire. And they are not like these vampires that have free will, that just go around like, oh, I'm young and beautiful forever, I'm just going to have fun. They are obeying their master's commands. That's what they do. All right, so they're more like animals. Love is beyond them. All right, and I like that Stephen King does not over romanticize the vampire. Like, people do become more beautiful as vampires in Salem's Lot, especially after they have fed. But there's not this like vampire love story that happens in Salem's Lot. If that's what you were looking for, Salem's Lot, not for you. And vampires, of course, as in most tradition, they cannot see their reflection. In Salem's Lot, they seem to be semi-corporeal. Like, they're definitely corporeal in that, like, they can bite you. But he also describes them as having flesh as insubstantial as a gauze curtain. And they're able to hover outside of windows, which is super creepy, especially if you have an upper level window without a ledge and you just see like an old friend who you knew died recently, like scratching on your window, waiting to be invited in, because as in typical vampire lore, in Salem's Lot, the vampires need to be invited into your home in order to enter. And once you have, because if you're in the presence of a vampire, you start to feel awful. You start to feel scared, and just all your childhood fears bubble up, and you just want to feel better. You just want to not be scared anymore. And you make the big mistake of looking into their eyes, these deep sable pools with red swirling around, and they are enchanting. And you start to feel better. You feel this warmth, and you want to be like them. You want to let them in. You want to let them bite you. So they have this like bewitching kind of alluring aura that they put out there. And then, like in any vampire tale, you need to know what are the rules for how to kill a vampire. So let's take a look at our vampire killing toolkit. And inside our toolkit, we have those weapons that deter the vampire, right? Like if you throw holy water at them, it might make their skin bubble a little bit. Same thing with if you stick a cross up against them, they'll get a bit of a burn, a scorch. Sunlight in Salem's Lot. I don't know if sunlight necessarily kills the vampire in Salem's Lot, but it makes them feel really sick. And they do not spontaneously combust like they would in Buffy. As fun as that is, that does not happen in Salem's Lot. And of course, the other deterrents come from lore like white roses and garlic. Any religious icon like St. Christopher's, medallion, anything blessed. In order to kill a vampire, though, you need to, of course, put a stake through their heart. And unlike in Buffy, it's not just like, ooh, quick jab, poof. All right. While the vampires in Salem's Lot do, and it's kind of poof into ash, it's not instantaneous. It's a much more dramatic process. But in order to stake a vampire, you actually have to hammer a stake through their chest. Okay, so now that we've talked about how to kill a vampire and kind of what they are, let's talk about what I liked. And I am most definitely biased here. Being a New England native, there's not much more special than autumn in New England. And Salem's Lot is a fictional Maine town, and Stephen King really summons that cozy fall sweater, diner coffee feel, that small town fall nostalgia. And he layers suspense onto that. And it just keeps you wanting to read on and on and on, turning the pages. And this is an enjoyable read. I did not at any point feel bored. It's one of those magical novels that you just whip through and you do not want to put down. It was enjoyable the entire time. And part of the reason for that is his characters feel real. They feel vivid. They have personalities. They have desires. They have issues. They actually react to stuff the way that normal people would probably react to situations. And actually, one of the most suspenseful scenes in Salem's Lot happens early on. And that is when there are two movers carrying a crate down into the basement of Marston House. And Stephen King is a master at describing fear and how it feels, and really getting your heart thumping like, ooh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Even if nothing ends up happening, it is masterfully suspenseful. It's one of probably the most suspenseful scenes I've ever read, besides the hand-holding scene in Haunting of Hill House. And if you have not read Haunting of Hill House, definitely pick that up. And his descriptions of fear, they never become old or tired. He describes things differently each time depending on whose perspective he's describing it from. There's one point where there's two brothers in the woods at night. And of course, the older brother is telling scary things to the younger brother. And when that happens with kids, of course, they start to think they're hearing things or seeing things. And then the fear just kind of amplifies all around. And that's another thing that Stephen King does really well, is that I know I've complained about it in the past about omniscient narration, like going back and forth between one person's thoughts and another person's thoughts and how jarring it can be. Stephen King does it really well. You always know who's thinking what, and it's just really straightforward. Stephen King is a master at evoking what it feels like to be scared. So that example with the boys in the woods, right? The younger boy eventually is like, I see it. I see the ghost. I see it. And terror, like hot iron, leaped into Danny's chest. Wires seemed to have run up his legs. He would have turned and run, but Ralphie was clutching him. And it's like, yes, that is how it feels. This like kind of shooting, like, oh my, fear. And I could go on for a very long time with what I liked about this book, and we don't have hours, so I'm going to cut it off in a second. But another thing that Stephen King does really well, while Salem's Lot is super suspenseful, it's not a novel that actually gave me nightmares afterward. But when you think about what is going on in the story, it's very much terrifying. And one of the scariest aspects is that Stephen King does make children vampires in the novel. Okay, let's now transition to what I did not like. And I know that Stephen King is known for making the town a character and that he's very, very good at this. There was one chapter early on in the novel, it's the first The Lot chapter, where he jumps around between a lot of different townspeople, and he gives really, really quick and vivid portraits of who they are and what they do, but there's so many of them and they jump around and you're not sure who's important to the story and who's not. And I know they all are in a sense, and that they're telling what is happening. But some of them do come, actually they all come back, but some of them come back like hundreds of pages later and you're like, wait, I think I know something about this person. And so you have to flip back, which it's great because it's like, it is this full detailed novel, but that was the only time reading it I was just kind of like, all right, who is this now? All right, but that's the only time it happened, and you catch on, and it all does work for storytelling. Another issue I had was, oh gosh, sometimes these characters just super procrastinate, like especially when action starts picking up and the main characters go out to hunt the vampires. And the vampires in Salem's Lot are like comatose during the day. You cannot shake them awake. So they hide in their coffin somewhere in a place that's not easy to get to, but they are very killable in that state. And of course, they awaken after sunset. And so if it were me, I'd get up at like dawn and try to hunt them. And as soon as sunset came, or anytime near sunset, I'd go hide in a church or something. But these characters, they head out the door and it's like, oh, it's like 5 p.m. I'm going to go hunting now. It's like, what? Why did you wait all day? Just go out earlier. And I know Stephen King did this to build suspense, but it's just like, stop procrastinating, characters. And then the other thing that was just a minor, I don't know, for me, minor point of confusion was the timing of being made of vampires. Some people being made vampires, it seemed to take days, whereas other times it seemed to just kind of happen in a night. And I'm not sure if that's just like part of like how much they were drained, or it's never made clear. And I guess it's fine to have that kind of mysticism around how everything works. But I did find it a little confusing because I was like, oh, I thought it was a longer process than this. Why is this person like in one night a vampire? Unless they weren't a vampire. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they weren't a vampire and maybe they were just kind of infected and under the master's spell. Maybe they hadn't fully become one yet. Let's rate Salem's Lot. Story, I rated a 9.5. So Stephen King hooks you right away. It's one of those cases where you get the end of the story at the beginning, but you really care the whole time about how the characters got to that point. And so it's masterfully suspenseful, and there's only one little issue why I knocked off the 0.5. And while all loose ends were tied up and we came full circle back around to our ending/starting point at the end of the book, the thing is, there was something that happened near the end there that I was like, wait, why did that happen? Dr. Cody has some strange logic that he applies near the end, which causes some certain things to unfold that I thought was maybe less than believable, but that was the only thing. So that's where the half point goes. And characters I rated a 10. The characters were awesome. And the major characters feel real, they're very likable, and also the scary guys are very scary, and there are some minor characters that are meant to be dislikable, and they are dislikable. But they all feel real, they all have their own motivations and personalities. So now for prose. Prose I rated a 9. This book has super clean prose. It was very readable. It never felt like it was an effort to read. There were times where the writing was just deep and gorgeous. It's not deep and gorgeous throughout the whole thing, but it's just very clean. So definite 9 there. Originality I rated an 8.5 because for the mid-70s, vampires taking over a town was probably more original than it is now, so I kept that in mind. But overall, it's not like the most original idea in the universe. World building, I rated a 9.5. While Stephen King doesn't create a whole big fantasy world, he does really make you feel like you are in Maine in autumn in the 1970s. And the only reason I knocked off really half a point was because I still have some lingering questions about vampires, or his version of vampires, but that is it. So overall, this would get a 9.3. It is just such an enjoyable read, and if you haven't read Salem's Lot yet, I encourage you to pick it up. And next time, I'll be reviewing Leviathan Wakes, so I'll see you then. Bye.